Hello and welcome everyone to the Varsity Tutors StarCourse series where, it's after a holiday weekend. Canada Day was last week, Independence Day was over the weekend, but maybe a more important calendar reminder here, we're only a few days away from the beginning of the World Chess Championships. And so we are thrilled to have a participant, a woman Grandmaster chess player herself, vying for the title of World Champion over the next couple weeks. We've got Nemo here to talk to us about improving our own chess game to get it to championship level. So I'm going to turn it over to her in just a second so she can download, I would say, most of what she knows. I don't think she can give away all of her secrets right before Worlds, but you'll learn quite a bit here in a second. We want you to get as much out of this as possible. And so make sure a couple things, one, there's a chat box to the right of the screen. Nemo's going to ask you some questions to find out what would you do in certain chess situations so that we can draw you in and really make you think critically, and she can show you some of her pointers along the way. So answer all of her questions there and ask questions there as well. If you've got any questions throughout tonight's session, drop those in that chat box. And in the last 10 minutes or so, I'll be gathering throughout all of your questions and I'll interview Nemo to get you guys some answers. Also, make sure you've got a camera nearby. In about a half an hour, we're going to give everybody an opportunity to lean into the screen and get themselves a selfie with the stars, maybe a stalemate selfie if we want to keep the alliteration going here. Get a picture with Nemo on her way to send her off to Worlds. And if you upload that to Instagram, tag Nemo and tag Varsity Tutors, you'll be entered to win an autographed chess set plus an entry in Chess Masters Camp with Varsity Tutors this summer. We've got new versions starting every Monday. There's a link on your screen if you want to learn more. Plenty of opportunities to really work on your game, and maybe next summer you'll be going to Worlds too. So with all that said, it's a real honor to have Nemo here to impart most, if not all, of her knowledge in this time we have together here. So let me introduce your teacher for today, world champion chess player or tournament participant, Nemo.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's awesome lesson on chess. I hope most of you guys have, played a little bit of chess before, but if you haven't, don't worry about that at all. Today, we're not only going to learn how to play chess, but we're also going to learn how to win in the game. So I'm going to be asking you for all your opinions, and I want you to think about some of these chess positions that I will be showing. And, we'll get some ideas flowing. We'll talk about things. And if you're not super familiar with chess already, once again, don't sweat it. We want you guys to have fun. That's the most important part. So very quickly, we're going to show you guys some ideas that are very essential, some checks, captures, threats, and some super simple tactic concepts as well, such as forks, pins, and skewers later. So without further ado, let's get started. All right. My first question for today, what is the most important piece on the chessboard? And I want you guys to think a little bit about it. Okay. I see some queens. All right. Some kings. Okay. I even see some pawns. To be fair, all of the pieces are sort of important. You need all of them to be able to play chess, but there's actually a specific value assigned to every single chess piece. So when I'm asking you what the most important chess piece is, well, let's take a look at this chart. So a pawn is worth 1 point because they can't go very far on each move. And bishops are worth 3 because they can go a little bit further. And knights are also worth 3 because they can not go as far as a bishop, but they're very unique. So, they can jump over pieces, and no other piece has the ability to do that. But they also don't have the range as a rook or a queen, which is why the rook becomes 5 points. The rooks can go up and down, sideways on the board, all over the place. They can basically reach every single square, traveling far distances. And now the queen is the most valuable piece on the board. It's the rook and the bishop combined. So she is worth 9 points. Now, of course, the king doesn't really have a value because if you lose the king, well, then you also lose the game. So based off of this points concept, you should be getting a clearer idea of what you want to capture. So typically, you only want to make the exchanges that are more beneficial for you, right? So you don't want to be giving up your queen for a knight because your queen is worth 9 points, but your opponent's knight is only worth 3 points. So if you do the math in your head, and that is a 6-point difference, not quite worth it. However, you can think a little bit, maybe, do I want to give a queen up for 2 rooks? Yeah, we can maybe go with that, right? 2 rooks is worth 10 points together because a single rook is worth 5. So technically, you're actually winning a little bit if you give up your queen for 2 rooks. So I'm hoping that this point system helps you determine whether or not you want to make that exchange or whether or not you want to make that capture. All right. So today we are going to be going pretty deep into chess. Before I show you guys specific positions and all of that stuff, like specific moves, I want to introduce you guys to chessboard notation. Now, this is a blank board, but you can see how it is set up. The bottom left corner of your chessboard should always be a dark square, and it starts from A going to H along the bottom of the board, and it goes from 1 up to 8 going along the sides of the board. So what this means is that each square has a name. For example, A1 is used to describe the bottom left square. B1 is used to describe the square next to it. And if you flip the board, obviously, then it goes from, if you're playing from the black point of view, then it goes from 8 to 1 and H to A. So you have to kind of keep this in mind. But all of our examples today, hopefully you will be familiar with the notation. And don't worry, we're going to be giving video examples as well in order to show you guys how to make specific moves. All right, so are you guys ready to, really learn how to win the game? The first takeaway is to obviously develop your pieces. These are some of the core tenets of the game and how to think about developing pieces. So rooks are powerful, they're worth 5 points, but they start in a powerless position where they're boxed in the corners, they got a pawn in front of them, there's a knight next to them. It should always be a goal to get your king castled and get a rook to the middle. This also protects your king at the same time. Even though you might think that the king isn't really a piece you'd want to develop per se, which you're right about. You don't want your king to be marching up like the rest of your pieces. You still want that king somewhere safe. So castling is basically, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And you are getting your king safe and your rook into the center of the board. And now knights can jump over pieces. So this gives them freedom. You don't have to move pawns out of the way in order to get knights into attacking positions. And they can quickly get to safety, if they're threatened by 1 to 2 pieces. So knights are very tricky. So keep that in mind. They have this unique freedom about them. And something that's always, always, always super important to remember is that you want to control the center and protect your king. But at the same time, you know what piece is best for that? It's typically a pawn. Even though pawns only have, a point value of 1, according to our chart from earlier, they're the lowest, but they can be super, super solid because you don't really want to, give up your bishop for a pawn typically. So pawns make really, really good defenses around your king. And also they're really good for controlling the center. So make sure you are keeping your pawn structure quite safe. You don't want to be just throwing away your pawns. So, control the center with your pawns, but don't push them so far that you can't protect them anymore. Now, I've said a lot of things, right? But what is something that you should think about each time it is your turn to move? So what are you thinking about in order to play your next move? What are you thinking? There's a lot of different ways you can approach a position. There's hardly a wrong answer to this. So thinking about whether you're in check is absolutely amazing. Very good stuff. If you're in check, well, you typically have to do something about your king, right? You have to either move it or you have to capture the piece that's checking you. You can also think about, is my queen in danger? Really good. Making sure you don't lose those pieces. Very important stuff. And why did my opponent make the last move they did? What are they thinking about? What do they want to play next move? Should I do something against what they're playing? Also something really important to think about. What pieces can I capture? Also great, right? Because we want to win free pieces, or we want to take pieces and exchange in a way such that we actually win points. So these are all some very, very, very good things to think about. Today, I'm going to introduce you to the 3 most important words in chess. Okay, maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but checks, captures, and threats are quite possibly, just some of the most important things that you have to keep in mind, because these 3 concepts build up the foundation for the game. So what even are checks, captures, and threats? Checks are the most forcing moves in chess. They are, checking your king. They're forcing your king to move or react to that. That's why it's so forcing. Because remember, the king is priceless. You can't lose that piece. Now, captures is second on our list because basically you are taking one of your opponent's pieces, and your opponent probably doesn't want to fully lose that piece, so they want to do something about it. That's why captures are second on our list. And then the last one on our list is threats. And you might be thinking, okay, so what makes a threat so special, right? Well, a threat is, for example, you moving your rook somewhere in order to take your opponent's queen. You're threatening to take your opponent's queen if you have one more move. And you might get lucky. Your opponent might not see that their queen is under attack and they might just drop it next move. But threats in general are just really good for making, your game play easier, because you have an idea for what to do. So whether it's threatening a checkmate, threatening to win your opponent's queen, threatening to take your opponent's pawn, these are all threats, and something that's super important for every game. All right, so let's get into some examples. Let's get into some real chess positions. And in this position, we are the black player. I know we're viewing this from the white side, but think about this from the black perspective. What does our checklist tell us to do? Okay, so first things first, are we in check? And the answer is yes, right? So we are in check. And we probably have to either move our king, take the queen, or block it. Well, 2 things on that list is just undoable. We can't move our king. He doesn't have anywhere to go. It's cornered in. We can't take the queen because there's nothing attacking our opponent's queen. So we have to block it. Now, how should we block this check though? Well, I think something that might instantly come to our minds is that our knight on d4 is also under attack. See, a check and a capture. So we're thinking not only about our checks and captures, we're also thinking about what our opponent can do. So once we realize we're in check and our opponent is threatening to capture our knight on d4, that is the name of the square, d4, we probably want to play knight to e6, which is using our knight from d4 to block the check. And we are basically saving our knight while getting out of check. So this is the first thing, you kind of want to do, looking for those checks and captures. Okay, so let's look at this position. We are playing black. This time the board is flipped. I was talking about this previously when we were talking about notation. You can notice how the bottom left corner is always a dark square. In this case, the square is now h8 instead of a1 because we're looking at this from black's perspective. All right, What does our checklist tell us we need to do? What do we need to do here? Okay, so first things first, we're thinking about the checks, the captures, and threats, right? I have a little acronym for it. I call it CCT. So if that helps you to remember to check for, check for checks, captures, and threats on every single move, then make sure you are doing, have some way, create some way for yourself to remember to always do that. So in this very specific position, our queen is threatened. That is a threat from white to play g takes h4. And we don't quite like that. Okay, so we probably want to move our queen. Now, where do we move our queen? Well, this is the part where we are still looking at CCT, checks, captures, threats. So what should instantly come into mind is looking for those checks. We have queen takes g3. We still lose the queen because the pawn on h2 is defending it, so we don't really want to play that. But we also have queen takes e4. And queen takes e4 is both a check and a capture. And that makes it very, very, simple for us to play because, wow, it's a check and a capture. And we're also going to be threatening the rook on h1. So it's like CCT in one, which is really cool. And also the pawn on e4 is not protected. So we win that free pawn. And this is how you should always be approaching positions. And in this next example, what we're going to see is that the order does matter, okay? The order is very important. Once again, we're playing black in this position. What do you think you should play? I'll give you guys a quick moment to think about it. Remember our checklist, right? Looking at checks and then captures and then threats. Always, always, always be approaching it from that order. All right, so we do have queen f2 and knight to f2. Two very, very good options. Knight to f2 is a fork. We will be going to these terms in a little bit, but basically it attacks or threatens the rook on h1, as well as the queen on d1. So pretty good move. However, the check in this position, and we only have one check actually in this position, that check is queen to f2. Queen to f2 is substantially stronger than knight to f2 because queen to f2 is a checkmate. So always think about checks first, right? Checking for checks really pays off. And this is how it will be playing out over this board where we play queen to f2, checkmate. All right. So now that we've talked about checks, captures, and threats in pretty, in a lot of detail, let's do a checklist challenge. So in this position, we're the black player. What are our threats? What are our opportunities? What's going on in this position, right? Start thinking about these things every time you get into a brand new position. That's the best way to approach all of this. All right, so our rook is indeed threatened by our opponent's knight. Our rook on e8 is under attack from that knight on c7. We have the opportunity to put the white king in check with our rook by maybe playing rook to e5. However, rook to e5, that rook will be captured by either the king or the knight on c4. So you don't really want to play rook to e5. Okay, so maybe that check is not too good. What about the other checks in the position? Well, we have bishop to e6. Also probably not the best move because our opponent's knight can take the bishop immediately. So you don't really get anything out of that. Now, if you have a really good eye, and if you're following the checklist properly and looking for all the checks, well, then you'll see that we have one more check. Bishop to e4 does not get captured, and it leads to checkmate. Okay, let's take a look at how this plays out over the board. Here, moving the rook out of harm's way may have been the initial goal, but then you will lose the opportunity for a clear checkmate, right? So notice how the pawn on b6 is really important in securing the checkmate. We're also stopping, the b6 pawn is stopping the king from taking on c5. Simply moving the rook to safety, as I mentioned, would just handle the threat of your rook being under attack. But you should always be looking for ways to also attack your opponent, which is why I moved like bishop to e4. It's so good because it's a check. And if it's a check, your opponent has to react to it. Now, if they can't react to it, if there's nothing they can do, then it's simply checkmate. And this is why I should always consider CCT, checks, captures, and threats. Okay, we're going to take it one step further. In this position, we're black to move. What do we want to play here? And this is the part where I want you guys to get your thinking caps on, right? Because it's no longer quite that simple. This is actually a checkmate in 2. The previous position we saw was a checkmate in 1. A checkmate in, however many of moves. So there are checkmates in 3s, there are checkmates in 4s, 5s, 6s, all that. These are always a lot of fun because there's a checkmate. So you start looking for all the checks in the position. Since a checkmate has the word check in it, which means that you need to check in order to checkmate. All right, so our next move here should be queen takes h3. Now, let's see this played out. Why are we always looking for checks again? Because it leads to checkmate, right? So one check is incoming with queen takes h3, and the second check will come after the opponent is actually going to be forced to play knight to h2. The only move to block. And now we just look for another check in order to checkmate, and we have queen to g2, which is a checkmate in 2. One check, 2 check, and checkmate. Maybe you will need more checks in the future if you need to do a checkmate in 3 or a checkmate in 4. But the concept is always there, and the concept is simple. In order to checkmate your opponent, you need to give a check. And that's why in every single position, always, always, always be looking for those checks, captures, and threats, guys. Make sure you're doing that. All right, so we've talked about the 3 most important things you need. Now, what about the 3 strategy tools you need in your toolkit? We're just slowly building, we're slowly expanding our toolkit, and soon you guys will be ready to take on anybody. My first question to you is, when should you give up your queen? When do you have to? Okay, and this is just to kind of get you guys started and, really thinking about, all right, what kind of moves should I be thinking about in each position? So you might think that you should never give up your queen, but you might have to if you're in check, right? So this is going to lead us to think about concepts of forks, pins, and skewers. These are all techniques we will be using to put our opponents in situations where they can't win or can't move. So it goes both ways. If you are forcing your opponent to give up their queen, then it's a win for you. But sometimes you have to be the one willing to sacrifice your queen in order to gain a little bit of an edge. Okay, so forks, pins, skewers. What exactly are these? What are we talking about, right? Are we talking about the fork you used to eat your dinner? Are we talking about the pin you used to, put up a piece of paper on a board? And what even are skewers? You might think of the barbecue skewer. That's the first thing that comes to my mind, at least. So in chess, these are all tactical concepts that we use. So let's take a look at the fork. And it's quite intuitive as to why it's called the fork, right? It literally looks like a fork. You're attacking 2 things at once. That's what makes it a fork. If it's 2 or more, then it constitutes as a fork. So you could be attacking 3 things, 4 things, but usually it's just 2 things. So the white pawn has black in a fork. It is attacking the rook on e6 because pawns capture sideways, and also attacking the king on g6. Black can only get one piece out of the way of the pawn attack, right? Because it's a check. So the king has to move, and then we can win the rook. And then white will be winning. So that's something that I hope you guys can remember. Think about it this way. A fork is quite literally a normal dinner fork. You're attacking at least two things. Super powerful idea because your opponent is forced to do something and they'll always lose. All right, so what is the next concept? What's a pin? Okay, the white knight on c3 is pinned. And a pin is basically, it involves three pieces. So you have a piece, and then you have another piece, and there's another piece. If you move the piece in the middle, then it reveals another piece that can be captured. So in this case, if the knight moves from c3, then the king is in check from the bishop on b4. And therefore, the knight on c3 cannot move. Now, a pin can also exist if instead of the king, the queen was there, right? But in that case, the knight can theoretically legally move away, but you would just lose your queen. So a pin always involves at least one piece by you and two pieces by your opponent. Or if you're the one getting pinned, then you have two pieces and your opponent has one. And for example, in this position, we call the knight on c3 a pinned piece. All right. So now, what's the difference between a pin and a skewer? Because they both seem to be like, we got something to capture, right? Well, a skewer is if the stronger piece is in front of the weaker piece. So in this case, the king is forced to move because it's in check. Black's bishop on d4 has white skewered. So white, if he moves his king, then he loses the rook on g1. And this is a skewer. So instead of the king, for example, imagine if there was a queen, right? You still don't want to lose a queen. So you move the queen, but then you still lose the rook on g1. And that is the difference between a skewer and a pin. A skewer is basically a reverse pin. Both are very uncomfortable for the most part. So keeping an eye out for those. You don't really want to get skewered. Pins are marginally more okay, but these concepts are really important when it comes to tactics and finding these little tricks in order to win pieces from your opponent. Okay, so let's use these three concepts and start looking at some puzzles. All right, so in this position, where is the black player? Can you find a fork? Take a quick look. All right, remembering to look at checks, captures, and threats, right? Knight to f3 forks the king with a check. So you can see how just because we have three new things in our toolkit doesn't mean we're giving up the three other things we learned previously. We still want to be looking at checks, captures, and threats. And that's why knight to f3 is super good in this position. The king is forced to move, king to g2, for example. And, after knight to f3, king to g2, white's queen is unfortunately king to h1. White's queen is still hanging, so we'll be able to play knight takes d4. All right, so now let's take a look at the example of a skewer. Okay, going back to checks, captures, and threats, right? Let's think our way through this. There seem to be a lot of checks in this position, but not every check means that you are going to win. Just because it is a check doesn't mean you are able to win. So if we look at all the checks really carefully here, the correct move will be queen to c2. But before you even get there, you probably looked at like queen to h5 or queen to f2 check or queen to e5 check. There's so many possible checks, right? Sometimes if you're not able to find the winning move off the bat, look through every single possible move. Now, this might sound super daunting, super scary, super time consuming, but if you're truly, truly in the mindset to get better, I would highly recommend doing this one thing, and that is to never dismiss an idea. You see in this position, you see you have so many checks. Well, one of these checks has to be good, right? Or usually has to be good. So let's see this played out over the board. Why is queen to c2 such a good move? Well, queen to c2 is the correct check in this position because it is a skewer. The king is in front of the queen, and now that the king has to move away, we have queen takes c8, taking the white queen, and all of a sudden we will be up a queen. So after that, you know, rather easy win once you are up a queen. All right. Thinking about this, let's go on to look at this position. We're playing black again in this position. What does our instinct scream at us? Well, firstly, it's really important to notice that the bottom left square is h8. So that means our opponent's pawn is being promoted in one move. b8 can promote to a queen. Oh no, what should we do about this? We don't want our opponent to have another queen, right? If our opponent gets another queen, then we're probably losing. They'll be up an entire queen. So you might be tempted to be playing rook to h8 in order to capture the queen on b8 when b8 becomes a queen. However, using CCT, using checks, captures, and threats, and thinking about skewers, what move do you see as a potential alternative? All right, so we should instantly be landing on rook to h1. Remember skewers and checks, right? I hope by now you've realized how important checks can be. The pawn may be promoted next move, but you know, you don't have to stop the pawn. You can also go capture the rook on b1, and then the pawn can no longer advance because once now it advances, you can just capture back on it. So rook to h1, king e2, rook takes b1, white promotes, but you can take back on that queen. Very, very, very important concept to always be looking for checks, captures, and threats, even if your opponent has the potential to win on their next move. All right, so in this next position, we are also going to be looking at skewers. By now, you probably see a pattern. It's probably a check, and it's probably in the diagonal of, you know, some of your opponent's pieces. So for example, in this position, what are some of our checks? Well, we have queen to e6, we have queen to f7, but none of those look particularly tempting. I mean, the queen will just capture back your queen and you'll be down a piece. So let's go to that check where we don't lose anything. Let's go to queen to h4. Queen to h4 skewers black. And with the bishop controlling the white diagonal going from a2 to g8, you know, the black king doesn't really have anywhere to go. He has one square to go to. He has g7 to go to. But when he goes to g7, then the queen on e7 is unprotected. You can see the skewer, right? The king moved away. Now we're going to go capture a piece. So even though, you know, it's protected right now, it doesn't mean that it will always be protected. In this case, queen to h4 serves a very good purpose, and that's to check away the king away from the queen, and at the same time, also be able to capture your opponent's queen. All right. And actually, incidentally, this leads right into a fork as well, because then you also have a check and you're attacking the bishop. So a really good move. All right. So let's take a look at this one. Now, this one is combining two concepts. Now, this one is a pin and a fork. That is my hint for you, as I want you to challenge yourself to find what you should be playing in this position. Okay, so our rook on g2 is actually also pinned, and our opponent is threatening you to take it. Next move. But it is our turn, thankfully. Otherwise, we'd probably be lost because queen takes g2 is a check and a capture, and it's also checkmate. So it is white to move, though. So in this position, we have knight to f6, and it won't get captured because it is a pin, because the pawn on G7 is pinned. Remember, you can't move your king into a check. Basically, that's what essentially it is. If the pawn takes back on the knight, then the king would be under attack by the rook. So you can't play G takes F6. So seeing this played out on the board, you'll realize that pins can give your attackers lots of freedom because they keep other pieces from counterattacking. So in this very specific position, you will realize that the knight can just go to F6. And even though the G7 pawn exists, it's next to useless because it can't capture back the knight. And since knight to F6 is a fork, then we will also take the queen on E4, and we will end up being up a knight, which is the perfect example of how these, tactical motifs, these ideas combine in order to give you a much better grasp of what to play in your positions. And these are all concepts, that are quite complicated. So don't worry at all if you don't get them right off the bat. It's totally fine. It's totally, totally fine. And there's so much more of where this comes from as well. So, always just approach it with a very open mind and have fun with these kind of tactic ideas. Make sure to remember the forks, pins, and skewers, and combine that with checks, captures, and threats in order to make the most out of your position. All right, so what is the most dangerous piece on the board? We talked a little bit about values of pieces. What is the most important piece? But what do you think is the most dangerous piece on the board? You'll be tempted to say, queen, because it is worth 9 points. It's the most valuable piece. And I agree, it's very, very dangerous. But from the tactics that we just saw, from the positions we just saw, you can see how knights can also be really dangerous. You can even see how pawns can be dangerous, So it's always about how you use your pieces. Pawns can even be promoted into a queen, and your opponent probably won't even see that coming. So when you're playing chess, make sure you're very aware of what your pieces do. Are you, pinning your opponent? Do you have the potential for a really nice check? Do you have the potential to capture your opponent's piece? Do you have the potential to fork your opponent's king and queen? Think about all of these things when you are playing the game. And these are some of my favorite secret weapons to kind of, teach you guys, because I definitely have a lot of secret weapons. Now, I can't reveal all of them to you guys, but here are some of my favorite ones. So I mentioned the promoting pawns, obviously, right? The queening, the importance of keeping an eye on your opponent's pawns and not throwing yours away, because a pawn can be worth so much in an end game where it can just run down the board and become a queen. And, you all of a sudden have a piece worth 9 points coming from a piece that was only worth 1. So promoting pawns, super important. And of course, knights are some of the sneakiest pieces ever, right? By the virtue of their movement, they have this tendency to hide. You might not see a fork coming until it's too late. Or you also need to think about how you can use your knights to really annoy your opponent. How you can use them to go, check the opponent's king and maybe grab their queen, like we saw in the previous example. But my favorite secret, my biggest secret of all, is if you want to win in chess, if you want to get better, if you want to be able to beat your older sibling or your parents or your teacher or that kid in school, practice. I have personally played chess for 18 years. So when they say practice makes perfect, you might never reach perfection. I by no means think I'm anywhere close to perfect with chess, but you will definitely get better. I can truthfully say that as of today, I am, 10,500 times better than I was when I was 3 years old, which is when I started. So 18 years of chess definitely made me improve quite a lot. Especially these days, you can even improve faster than I did when I was younger online chess programs like chess.com really let you practice different situations that you might only see a few times in a real game. But if you have all these ideas like pins, forks, skewers, checks, captures, threats practiced really well, then when you go into a real game, then it's going to be such a piece of cake, right? You'll instantly see and be like, ah, yes, here I have this check and I've seen this before. So that means I can just play it instantly. So practice is always amazing. And guys, don't forget, there is also the Chess Masters Camp with Varsity Tutors. So you can check that out with the link on your screen if you want more information.
Thank you so much, Nemo. And actually segues really nicely. We've had a lot of great questions. So a couple things for everybody out here. One, we'll do a quick summary before too long here to make sure everybody knows what they want to practice. Two, please keep the questions coming. You guys have had some absolutely amazing questions, and we're going to ask all those. But Nemo mentioned Chess Masters Camp. There is a chance actually to win a free part in that, and that's if you've got a camera nearby. We're going to give everybody an opportunity to take a picture with Nemo here in a second. I didn't mention at the beginning. I totally blew it. I mentioned you're going to Worlds, but we're talking to the Canadian national champion right now, recently crowned just a couple years ago. So if you want a picture with a champion chess player, get that camera ready right now while everybody's logging into the phones, kind of, making sure that, double checking there's nothing in your teeth and all those kind of things. I just want to summarize what a couple things you mentioned that really stood out to me. One, being really disciplined about checks, captures, threats. I think very often you kind of react to what your opponent just did. But I think what you were talking about is that discipline of, hey, if you're thinking about your checklist every time, then it's harder for your opponent to manipulate you in some way or get you excited about something. You're kind of always thinking about those. And then when you and I talked before class, really seeing the power in the skewer that, it's kind of a unique way to kind of look at the fork in a way of like, I'm going to get one of these pieces and I know you have to move this one, but sort of using the logic of the game, that was really important. So everybody remember those forks, skewers, and pins are ways to just use the logic of the game to get something out of your opponent. So all that said, I think I've talked long enough to give everybody a chance to log into those phones and ask those final questions for Q&A. So Nemo, let me turn it back to you so everybody can get a picture with a chess champion.
All right. So I do hope everybody was able to learn a little bit. Okay. So hope you guys do have your cameras ready. You can start clicking away. As a reminder, there will be a giveaway if you post and tag Varsity Tutors. So hope you guys are enjoying and have enjoyed today's lesson so far.
Awesome. Hopefully that gave everybody a chance to get some great pictures. Then, like Nemo mentioned, there is the giveaway. If you upload that to Instagram, tag Varsity Tutors and Nemo. We'll have those official handles up on the screen. At the end of class in a few minutes here, you'll be entered to win an autographed chess set courtesy of Nemo there, and then also a spot in Chess Masters Camp. There's only one winner of the prize for Chess Masters Camp, but everybody's a winner if you join. Check the link on your screen if you want to learn a little bit more. We even have some kind of bonus exciting Nemo content that we put together not long ago for Chess Masters campers. So everybody check that out. And in the meantime, we've got some questions, some really good, insightful ones coming in here. I think my favorite was you had asked the question about, when do you have to give up your queen and all those. Somebody asked, and thank you for asking this, is it ever a bad idea to take your opponent's queen?
Well, I mean, it can definitely be a bad idea to take your opponent's queen if you get checkmated in the next move. Sometimes the queen can be bait, right? But the trick to this is you should always take your opponent's queen. If you don't have to be 100% certain. And let's just say if you're 85% certain that you won't get checkmated, your opponent won't be winning like your queen and a knight or something. If you are gaining points, material, right? If you're gaining material based off of capturing your opponent's queen, then I would say go for it. But sometimes it can be a trick. Somebody could be giving away their queen and trying to checkmate you. So keep that in mind when you're taking your opponent's queens.
That makes a lot of sense, right? The queen has the highest point value. really the only reason you don't want to give it up is if there's a, a clear imminent checkmate that's going to happen to you. And if that's more than a couple moves away, if you can't see that coming in, then you've probably gained enough of an advantage that, you're in pretty good shape. So I like that. And thank you for that question. That was really good. It could be bait, but it's not always likely. And as long as you're checking for what could happen next, that's great. So let's do another question a lot of people had. I think we hear about, people in chess of like, oh, she can think 10 moves in advance, 20 moves in advance, and all those kind of things. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How many moves do you see in advance? Is that really a competition among, great chess players of how much they see in advance? Are you thinking too far in advance, or are you really sticking pretty disciplined to the checklist and letting things unfold? What are you thinking about, say when you go to Worlds in a little bit?
Well, I actually really like this question because chess is a little bit like life. You can definitely underthink. You can totally do something and not think about the consequences, or you can also overthink, which is what I tend to do, and then worry too much and then end up not making a really good move because you're stressed about everything else that comes after it. So I definitely have usually been able to calculate many, many moves in advance. But if you're somebody who is a little bit newer to the game, don't worry too much about seeing the end of the line. Don't worry too much about any of that. Just, feel what's natural for you. I think 2 moves is pretty natural. You make a turn, your opponent makes a turn. Totally cool. Sometimes I'll go like 8 moves deep into a line, but along the way, I will have made some calculation mistakes. So that's not always good either. And sometimes I'll have a really clear train of thought and be able to calculate all the way to the end. But that definitely comes with a lot of practice.
I think that's really good advice too, but you kind of have to practice a lot to be able to see that far in advance because, the other person's going to do something. You can plot out. I've definitely fallen victim to this of like, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that. And 9 moves later, I got them. And now the opponent's going to do something. So, it's really that experience of, training yourself to see. You don't have to say, it's not an innate skill to see multiple moves in advance. It's having played a lot and understanding how that person's going to react or how they might have to react. And I think the other thing that you did a great job of showing us today is that, you can see further in advance if you know which pieces are pinned, which moves are going to put someone in check where their move is dictated. We know what they have to do. So there are fewer possibilities and you get to see a little into the future. If you're using things like, checks, pin skewers, and all that, you kind of know what's going to unfold from there because you've made it happen. So I love that. Hey, to your point about, as a beginning player, you may only see 1 or 2 moves in advance and that's fine. One of my favorite, recurring questions was, hey, you're a champion, you're on your way to the world championships and all that, but what's your advice for beginners? What was some of the best advice you got as a beginner? You talk to, we've got a lot of young kids here who would like to be on your track soon, but you didn't start on that track, right? What advice do you have for beginners to, really enjoy and just kind of continually improve at the game?
Right. So I think my favorite piece of advice for beginners, and this doesn't just apply to chess, this applies to a lot of other things you might do in life. Picking up new skills requires effort. It requires time. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to accept defeat when you lose a game to somebody who is stronger and you feel like, oh man, I really don't want to play chess anymore. Like that was such a horrible loss. So get all of those thoughts out of your head. Just focus on having fun. Improvement comes to everybody at a different pace. So don't compare yourself to other people. Don't feel like you have to be at a certain level within a certain frame of time. Just kind of go at it at your own pace and be like, I want to learn chess. This looks fun. Today, I want to look at pins because those look really interesting. I really like the way that my opponent can't make a move. Or you could be like, today, I really want to look at more forks because, wow, being able to annoy my opponent and capture one of their pieces by force seems super fun. So, take chess kind of, you don't have to win a tournament within a month. Just sort of approach it with that kind of mindset.
I like that. That's, just get a little bit better every day. And if you enjoy it, you will get better through experience. You mentioned that secret weapon of practice. I think just to make sure everybody, so all the boards we showed today came from the chess.com puzzles feature. And they let you, like you said, just work on forks for a while. Like, do you see them? Do you see what the moves are? Work on skewers, or even, different paths to checkmate. So people are asking about, how do we know it's a 3-move checkmate or a 4-move checkmate and all those kind of things. And it's like, if you go and play with some of those puzzles, you can start to spot those things in advance, which I thought was great. We got time for 2 more questions for you. One more for you. Now, one for the, more advanced folks out there. We had a lot of questions on gambits. Can you quickly tell us, what is a gambit, and do you have a favorite gambit?
So a gambit is when you give up a pawn or some material in the opening in order to gain tempo, gain initiative, which basically just means giving up a pawn so you can bring all of your pieces out really quickly. I've personally, traditionally, never been too big of a fan of gambits, but that's just because of my own style of chess has always been a lot more solid. I don't like giving up pieces. I'm like, I like all my pieces, they're my friends. I don't want to lose any of my friends. So I don't really like playing them personally, but I would say there are some really good gambits that you can take a look at, which include the King's Gambit, really fun. There is a gambit. There's a Vienna, which is also usually a gambit. Your opponent can choose to reject it as well. There's the Evans Gambit, which is also really good. And there's, for example, so I think King's Gambit, Evans Gambit are some that come immediately into mind.
Perfect. Thank you. As someone just mentioned, hey, it's a lot to take in. And so, I didn't mean to lead down the rabbit hole of gambits, but just good to kind of, get people's minds thinking. That maybe in your next class, we can talk a little more about those. But thank you for that. Couple other questions. I have one last question for you. One that came in. Someone was saying it's a lot to take in. Is this available after? Yes, this will be on our YouTube channel immediately after class. And so if you want to see some of those puzzles again, if you want to pause the video and see, how you would play it, and then see what Nemo says and how it plays out in her demonstration, everything, absolutely, this will be up on our YouTube channel within the next couple of minutes. And so be ready for all that. So absolutely, please check that out. And then last question for you, Nemo, in terms of watching, we got to watch how you think a little bit about chess, but you're playing in the biggest tournament in the world, it's starting next week. So for those of us who want to watch you at the Worlds, how can we track your progress at the World Championships?
All right. So I'll be posting all about my entire trip there on my social media, but also the games will be broadcasted live, and not just mine. There's in total, I believe, 128 women this year playing. I'll be playing the Women's World Cup. There's also the open section, which is mostly, I think it's all male. But yes, so that will be broadcasted on twitch.tv/chess, which is the official chess.com Twitch handle. And also I might be broadcasting on my personal Twitch channel, but I haven't 100% thought about it yet.
Awesome. Hey, on behalf of all of us out here, best of luck at the Worlds. It should be good. I think a lot of us will want to tune in and see. Hopefully we can follow along. We'll definitely be looking for those principles of checks, captures, threats, and forks, pins, and skewers. So huge thanks to you, Nemo. Thanks to all of you out there for great questions and participation. It was so fun seeing everybody, get acclimated to chess notation and throw in all of your thoughts on what the best next move would be and all those kind of things. So with all that said, here is some of Nemo's social media, so you can follow a little bit about her trip. These are the handles to tag to win that autographed chess set, and the entry in Chess Masters Club, where you can practice all summer and be ready maybe for next year's World. So thanks all of you for all of your questions. We look forward to seeing your pictures on Instagram, seeing all of you in Chess Masters camp here over the rest of the summer, and to rooting on Nemo in the World Championship. So with that, a huge thanks, everybody. And I guess this is checkmate for now.